Welcome back to Star Narratives, the podcast. This is your go-to for accessible and relatable astrology designed to help you understand your inner workings and spiritual awakening. I'm your host, Natha Perkins. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's Natha. We are still deep in Gemini season. I really feel Gemini a lot. I have a lot of Gemini in my chart, and so my brain is always naturally fast-moving, and there are a million things going on, and I always have tons of questions. I want to get down into the details and understand, like, why is it like that? What does that mean? So I've really been feeling it as we have had so much Gemini energy in the sky. And I know that not everybody has that strong Gemini signature in their chart. And so I am asking you, as you're sitting here listening to this, to think back over the last week or two and get a sense of how your mind has been impacted by all of this Gemini. So if you are new to this podcast, season 5 is where I am going through all of the sun signs as the sun in the sky is in each of these signs. And so we're looking at 4 or 5 weeks worth of sun sign teachings, where I take a different facet of every sign and I break it down for you. And so these are astrology lessons, yes, but they are deeper than that. I am asking you questions designed for inquiry so that you can use these archetypes to understand yourself better. The more self-awareness, the more of us have on this planet, the more healing, presence, emotional wellness we have. So use these teachings, whether you love astrology or you've never been into it at all. These are teachings that are just designed to help you understand yourself better. And of course, the people that you know and love. If you are listening in real time, welcome. And if you are listening and this episode is long past, know that all of these episodes are evergreen. They are simply teachings that are designed to help you understand who you are and what you are doing right now in this lifetime. Now, the second half of each of these episodes is an astrological forecast that talks about specifically the astrology of the week. This week, we're looking at June 10th through 16th of 2024. If you are listening at some point in the future, you can look back and say, what was I doing that week of June 10th through the 16th of 2024? Because there's a lot of insight that you can glean simply from looking in hindsight at your life. Now, if you like my style and you're listening, you want to get a private reading, or if you want to learn more about astrology, or maybe you are a healer or a therapist of some sort, and you want to be able to integrate a little bit of astrology into your client work, I have private readings, I have mentorships, and if you want to become a professional astrologer, I have an apprenticeship program. You can find all of that at electraastrology.com. You can also find me on Instagram at electra_astrology. So let's jump into the teaching for today. By the way, I am putting these on YouTube now. So if you are somebody that likes to watch, you can see the videos on YouTube at Electra Astrology. All right, well, this is our 4th week in Gemini, and this is our last week. Next week, we will transition from Gemini into Cancer, and the whole mood is going to shift. We started off with the transition from Taurus into Gemini, where we looked at the difference between the mind and the body. Then we moved into that Gemini-Sagittarius axis. This is the axis of the mind. In Gemini, we're looking at the details, we're looking at our perceptions, and in Sagittarius, we are looking at the big picture and we are looking at our perspectives. Last week, we talked about that Gemini shadow, the tendency to overthink, the tendency to allow information to come in and rule our minds, tendency to just let our minds rule our minds, and then, of course, gossip and some of that mental unwellness, mental illness. This week, we're talking about the Gemini gifts. Like I said earlier, I have quite a strong Gemini signature in my chart, so I really relate to this. And I was thinking, one of the things that I love so much about having such strong Gemini is my curiosity. And I have gotten this feedback. People say, why do you ask so many questions? It's true. I do ask a lot of questions. I get really curious about what people have eaten for dinner. I get really curious about who said what to who. I get really curious about how somebody's day was. And my kids and my family can all report that I am a questioner. And it is because I'm interested. That is one of the Gemini gifts, this distinct curiosity. Gemini, ruled by Mercury, is a seeker of information. And Gemini, if you think about the whole astrological zodiac as a kingdom, and then we dial down in and we say, we are each our own kingdom. And we say that Mercury is the messenger. Mercury is the page. Mercury is the one that goes around and visits all of the different parts of the kingdom, all of the different lords and ladies and fields and whatnot, and gathers the information and then brings it back to the king and the queen. So we're going to move into Cancer and Leo next, but I look at the moon as the queen and I look at the sun as the king. We say with Mercury, that is the messenger god. That is the messenger that brings the messages to your internal queen, your emotional ruler, and your internal king, your sense of solidity and self. And so it is very important that we nurture our Mercury and that we accept our curiosity and that we ask the questions that are important to gather the information. Now, Gemini people also tend to be fun. They love to laugh. They love to make light of things because they are so quick at assimilating information. And remember, we all have Gemini in our chart. You don't have to have a strong Gemini signature to experience these things. And I would say that over the past few weeks, that you, even if you have no Gemini, have been experiencing this curiosity, this wanting to know and wanting to assess and wanting to have some fun with the information that's coming in. I mean, I think that we can all, if you're in the United States and we are gearing up for a political election this year, and election years, in my experience, are always really fraught with a lot of tension and a lot of stress. But if you look at some of the things that are going on politically, it's actually kind of humorous. And I think that that's one beautiful thing about Gemini that we can all really tap into is the humor. Being able to see the humor in some of this information that's coming in, being able to just do nothing other than throw your hands up and laugh about situations that might seem frustrating or situations that have no answers. So we look at Gemini as what kind of messages is your brain bringing you? What kind of messages is your internal Mercury bringing to your king and your queen? And then how are you choosing to process them? Because we do have a choice. And that is one of the beauties of Gemini, is that it does not like to get deep. It does not want to go underneath and deeply explore in the same way that a sign like Scorpio would, or a sign like Cancer. Gemini, being air, it is much more concerned with resting on the surface and gathering as much information as possible so that you can put it together, but also having some fun. And that's why we say Gemini is represented by the archetype of the twins, because it can hold varying perceptions. And it also knows how to have fun, even when the facts don't necessarily seem very fun. So this week, see whether you can tap into some of that fun and see the lighter side of some of the stuff happening, because, it's pretty heavy out there. I don't think any of us can deny that. There's a lot that is very confusing. There's a lot that we don't understand. And there's a lot that when we feel like we understand it can feel very defeating. And so with Gemini, this is where we actually have a choice to lighten it up and just see some humor in some of the details. Gemini, like we have talked about, is also intelligent, is very good at processing information that comes in. There are different forms of intelligence. And I think that's important to take that into account, because if we are on autopilot, we might think that going to school, going to a fancy university, getting straight A's is what means that you're intelligent. But one of the things that I like so much about Gemini is that it is so mutable. And it really speaks to their having so many different kinds of intelligence. So that is something for you to think about and maybe do some journaling on is, what kind of intelligence do you have? I remember thinking when I was younger, because my sister was very smart, she always got very good grades. She indeed did go to fancy universities. And I remember looking at her and thinking, wow, she must be smarter than me. But when it comes to other things, like for instance, an intuitiveness, being able to understand the workings of the human psyche, that is something that I excel at. Not to say that she doesn't excel at that as well, but I would be remiss to think that I was not intelligent simply because I wasn't a straight A student. And believe me, I wasn't. So that's an exercise that you can do as you are really sitting with this final week of Gemini, is understanding your own version of intelligence, understanding that we all process information in different ways. And we could look at the elements for that. And we could look and say, if your Mercury, and by the way, you can just pull this up on a site like just astrology.com, put in your birth data. If your Mercury, which is the planet of the mind, is in a fire sign, you are probably going to process information faster. You might be more likely to take action. If your Mercury is in an earth sign, you might process information slower, and you might need a lot of time to really parse through it and get a sense of what's there before you can do anything with it. If your Mercury is in an air sign, then you are looking at having a very quick mind that processes information very quickly. And if your Mercury is in a water sign, then you're going to be processing your information through the lens of emotions. And even just with those four delineations, you can see that not everybody is going to be good at all kinds of processing. The air people are not going to know what to do when there's an emotional situation. The fire people are not going to be comfortable in a situation where they have to take their time. The earth people are not going to want to process information quickly. And the water people are certainly not going to want to process using logic, because logic is so different than feelings. Understanding your own sense of intelligence is a really important part of working with Mercury. It is also related to the way that we communicate with people. If you aren't totally aware of how you process information and you're kind of going by the seat of your pants, or you're expecting yourself to do it the way that your friend does, or your partner or your parent does, that is going to throw you off in the realm of communication. And Mercury in Gemini definitely rules communication. And we also know that when we're doing this spiritual awakening work, if you're listening to this podcast and you are wanting to become more self-aware, that your communication with people is one of the very first stops on that train. Learning how to communicate better, learning how to listen, learning how to make eye contact, learning how to ask for what you need, and how to have a productive discourse of back and forth, knowing how to express something that you're feeling emotionally, knowing how to leave a conversation at an appropriate time. These are all incredibly important things to be learning and to be practicing. Because when we look at some of the bigger overarching problems that we have as a collective, as a community, as a country, a lot of what tends to break down is the communication. So we are learning how to have positive relationships with people. We're learning how to understand where they're coming from, at least hear what they're saying, and hoping that they're doing the same for us. And that's one of the Gemini gifts, and we want to really cultivate that. But before you can cultivate good communication, you want to have at least a general understanding of how you relate to your own intelligence, how you process information. If you are in a partnership, for example, with somebody that needs a lot of time to process information, well, you're going to run into issues if you just want the conversation to be over quickly. So when we're talking about Gemini and we're talking about that messenger, your personal messenger, it's a good idea to get to know that messenger. So I joked in a few episodes earlier about naming that monkey mind that you have, Jack. I named mine Jack, and being curious about what Jack had to say. Where is Jack trying to get in and meddle? it's another interesting facet of that to really look at how, in this case, Jack approaches everything. Is Jack a good communicator? Does Jack understand their own version of intelligence? And it has taken me many, many years to really understand the way that my brain works, the way that my psyche works. And I'm still not all the way there, but it has really gone a long way in helping me communicate, especially in difficult conversations with difficult people. So go ahead and just take a few deep breaths and just tune in to how this information is landing with you. How's it feeling in your body? We leave Taurus season, but we don't leave the body. And when we leave Gemini season for Cancer season next month, we will not leave the mind. These are things that we carry with us. And so we want to always be integrating them. So how is it feeling as we're talking about your mind? And how often have you given these subject matters attention? Are these things that you have thought of about yourself? With Gemini, this is the sign that belongs in the third house. And the third house is the house of our youth, is the house of our elementary school, middle school education, even high school. There's something about this third house where we're staying close to home. So we learn a lot about who we are, how our mind works, our level of intelligence, and I will say our perceived level of intelligence, because I think a lot of us come out of those experiences feeling like we're not as smart as we really are, because the school system is really very homogenized and based on one version of intelligence. And if you're not able to really fit into that version, then it's very easy to slip through the cracks and feel like you're not smart. So as you're doing this work of analyzing, how do I communicate with people? Am I good at communicating? Do I feel like I'm intelligent? How do I process information? As you're doing this work, look back into your past, into your elementary school years, for example. I remember I went to a more of a Waldorf style school for kindergarten and first grade. And then I switched to a public school in second grade, and I did not know how to read, and everybody else knew how to read. So I had to go for about 6 months into special classes. I had to leave my regular classroom and go sit with a reading teacher. And what I learned from that experience was that I was stupid, that there was something wrong with me because I didn't know how to read. And so even though I learned how to read very quickly and I became actually a speed reader, I read much faster than most people, that always stuck with me. I'm not smart. So it's things like that that are so innocent and so innocuous that can really stick with you. And this is a time, as we're going to go in when I go to the forecast, where this Gemini energy, for several reasons, is really loud. And it is really acting like a mirror. And it is helping us to understand some of the influences from when we were young and how they still impact us negatively. Of course, we have things that impacted us positively. That's great. We don't need to necessarily heal those things. So as we're sitting here, I just want you to think and have this in your field of awareness, that if you are sitting there thinking about what you learned about your own intelligence, that you might have some elementary or middle school memories that come into place. Now, middle school memories oftentimes look like getting made fun of by other people. So that can also be hugely impactful, getting teased, getting hassled by your fellow middle school peers. It's not that we have to go back, process those things again, but it is really helpful information to remember. Oh, that's how that started. Because as we are doing this transformational work now in 2024, it is a very potent time to let go of those little splinters. It's like the splinters rising to the surface of your skin, ready to come out so that they're not bothering you. the pebbles in your shoe are not kicking around in there anymore. We want to get our minds really on board. And that's what I've been teaching you over this whole Gemini season, is how to be so aware when you have errant thoughts that come in, or your mind just wants to lead you on some anxious journey about some potential problem in the future, or you have some belief that is absolutely not true anymore at all about yourself and who you are and how your mind works, because we want to get our messenger like in really good form. We want our messenger bringing us the best information, the most potent information. We want our messenger to be like the best employee ever, so that when he or she shows up to deliver the information about the kingdom to our internal king and queen, it's like this trilogy that works, where everything becomes clear. And it's this team that says, my mind comes in and tells me this. My emotions come in and tell me this. My strong sense of self comes in and tells me this. And they're all working in tandem so that you can be the strongest leader of your own kingdom as possible. We need really strong leaders right now, and we are all very unique leaders. We are all meant to have different skills and different things that we bring to the table. So that is your homework for what to think about this week. All right, let's talk about the astrology of the week. All right, well, we begin this week on June 10th. We went through Mars changing signs from Aries to Taurus over the weekend. This was pretty edgy energy. I think a lot of people might relate to just, it felt like the energy was infused with strong emotion or big questions, or even, oddly enough, a sense of exhaustion. And part of that is because Mars is the dispositor, or rather the ruler of the North Node right now. The North Node is pushing us to understand our own impact on the world and understand what we need to do to really advocate for ourselves in a stronger way. And that can be tricky work. While Venus, which is the dispositor or the ruler of the South Node, has also had a very busy week. Venus made a conjunction or a cazimi with the Sun. And both the Sun and Venus made a square to Saturn. So there's just a lot of energy in the field. And I think that in some ways, our human mind has a hard time processing all of this because we are in such a time of up-leveling that there's a lot that we just simply don't understand, and yet we can feel it. As time progresses, we will continue to understand more and more about how all of this has impacted us and the growth that it is bringing. But for now, just know that if your weekend felt edgy, this could be why. And it's not quite over yet, because we have Mars coming in to make a square to Pluto. Pluto is the modern ruler of Scorpio. Mars is the traditional ruler of Scorpio. So these two rulers of the sign of Scorpio go head to head. They are in a creative tension this week. And so Mars wanting to move into action and get things done and decisively win. And Pluto, which is always the pusher of awareness. And awareness is not always easy to look at. And deciding and moving into action is not always easy to do. And yet there's some way that these two parts of yourself have to work in tandem. They have to figure out how to do that. You might feel like there are parts of you that disagree with other parts of you, or you might find that things are rising to the surface that you don't necessarily want to look at, but it is important to do that. And with all of this concentration of Gemini, still Jupiter, Mercury, Sun, and Venus in the sign, we are trying to mentally conceptualize everything. And with Gemini, it's so much information coming in. It's too much information. And it can cause us an information overload where we just find ourselves sitting almost catatonic, just scrolling, intaking more and more and more information, but not really doing anything with it, just allowing it to clutter the mind. So work this week not to clutter the mind so much. And when you do realize that your mind is crazy with too much, that is your mindfulness bell to tune into the very present moment, like we've been talking about. On June 11th, we have Venus making a sextile to Chiron, and that is followed on June 13th by the Sun making that same sextile. you're taking the information that came to you over the weekend or over the last week around your Venus things, your money, your values, your relationship to your own mind and the beauty of your mind. And you're looking at what you need to do to bring some healing, to bring some alchemizing, some magic. This 22 degrees is that alchemizing degree. And so there's a magic that you're creating. And then we look at the sun, which represents that deep, abiding sense of self. So we're doing all of this deep exploration if you're paying attention. If you are all immersed in all the information and you're getting all embroiled in all of the petty drama, you're not going to have the access to that deeper work that your soul is yearning for you to do and that the astrology is actually asking you to do as well. Back to June 12th, we have Mercury making a square to Saturn. Mercury doesn't particularly enjoy interacting with Saturn because Saturn is so no nonsense and Saturn wants to see the facts laid out logically. Saturn is that advisor that comes in that says, why are you doing it like this? And Mercury wants to live by the seat of its pants. Mercury wants to zip around to all of the different parts of the kingdom and do a little gossiping and gather some information and try to communicate, etc. And when it meets with Saturn, Saturn can have a sense of reminding Mercury, your mind, to cast off the nonsense, the things that aren't really working. And so this can really help with that overcluttered information overload. It can help you to understand, where do I want to focus my attention? And believe me, we all have a million problems floating around in the sphere of our lives and a lot of things to solve. And the mind will keep reminding you of those things. But again, this is where we come back and we have a little bit of that mind control, like I talked about a few weeks ago, of really telling your brain what it is that you're going to focus on and look at today and what you're going to put on the back burner for another time. On June 14th, we have Mercury now meeting with the sun. We had Venus meet with the sun last week, and this week it is Mercury's turn. If you remember, we also had that new moon in Gemini that was exact with Venus and the sun. So that means that the sun, the king of your kingdom, is getting many multiple messages delivered. Now, the moon, the queen of your kingdom, the emotional queen, had many messages delivered with Venus and the sun in that conjunction. And now the messenger, Mercury, the page, has come to meet with the king to give information about every planetary archetype that Mercury has just passed through. So this is more information for you about who you are now and where you need to focus your attention and what your bigger mission is, what your hero's journey is in the here and the now. As my old astrology mentor, Jamie Kale Miller, used to say, this is an epiphany day. So make sure that you're paying attention to the information that's coming in. That's June 14th. All right, now on the 16th, we have Venus making this square with Neptune, both at 29 degrees. And remember, 29 degrees is the degree of mastery. I mentioned this a few podcast episodes ago, but I've been really interested in the step system that astrologer Christopher Witecki has come up with. And we know that traditionally the 29th degree is a degree of mastery. And Witecki talks about this degree being one where we have to feel, and then we have to act, and then we have to know who we are. So it's all three of those that come together in this soup that represent what we're doing at the 29th degree. So with Venus, we are feeling into our Venus things, our money, our values, our worth. And we are deciding how to take action. What do we need to do and what do we not need to do? Sometimes taking action is also regarding the things that we need not to do. And then we use those two things to help us really feel into who we are now at this point in our lives. We're all really different than we used to be. And so as Venus comes in to make this square to Neptune, we are also having to incorporate in these Neptunian things, which is about higher power and the absence of human control, that we must allow the divine or the creative to work its magic. And as the I Ching says, the tool of the creative or the divine is time. We don't look too far behind us. We don't look too far in front of us, and we don't look to the side of us. We focus on what is right in front of us, and we allow time to work its magic. All right. I hope this was helpful. I will see you all next week. Thanks so much for spending time with me. You can find me all over the internet or at electroastrology.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with your friends and help them discover us. And if you are the kind of person who likes to leave reviews, I'd greatly appreciate it.